Welcome to the France 24 debate. Could the war of words between Washington and Tehran spiral out of control? A tweet can be taken as a meaningless aside, except when it's written by the President of the United States. Donald Trump's social media lack of diplomacy has sent shockwaves across the already troubled terrain of US-Iran relations. We've had the pullout of the nuclear deal, an Iranian ultimatum to Europe, more sanctions imposed by Trump on Iran since that pullout, and a US aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf. Now, it's not just alarmists who are concerned after Trump tweeted, if Iran wants to fight, that will be the official end of Iran. Never threaten the United States again. This in response to a rocket being fired into the green zone in Baghdad in neighbouring Iraq. Who fired that rocket is still a question to be answered. Our guests to discuss the current situation are here in the studio, Thierry Coville, who's research fellow at IRIS, which is the French Research Centre for International and Strategic Studies, author of Iran, the Invisible Revolution. Thierry, thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. We always appreciate your time, sir. Joining us now from Tehran, Mohammad Marandi, who's Associate Professor at the University of Tehran. Mohammad, thanks for being with us. In Washington, we have Matthew Brodsky, Senior Fellow at Security Studies Group. Matthew, thank you for being with us. Advisor to the Trump administration on several Middle East policy matters, and has also advised the Kushner team and Greenblatt on the Palestinian-Israeli peace process. Matthew, be with you in a moment. Joining us from London, Tara Kangalu, who's a journalist, a fellow at the East-West Institute. Tara is an award-winning journalist who covered, among other things, the Iran nuclear deal development for one of our rival channels, I believe. Born and raised in Tehran, critical of the US's psychological warfare against Iran, and we're looking forward to getting your thoughts in a moment, Tara. Starting here with Thierry Coville from IRIS here in France. Thierry, people who maybe don't have an inside view of what's happening right now may feel, in some ways, a justifiable concern about the language that's being used and the situation as it stands on the ground.
Yes, but I think we have to remind viewers of the historical context. I would say the present difficulties are starting from just 1 year ago when the US pulled out of the nuclear deal, Iranian nuclear deal, and has applied what they call a strategy of maximum pressure on Iran. And I think this strategy doesn't work. Iran has not backed out on the 12 points of negotiation that the US wants. So Iran is not answering. I think there is a temptation in the US. What we have seen is to double down on this strategy. So more economic sanctions to put the pass down, which is the Iranian official army as a terrorist group, sending, saying these military threats. I think it all comes back on this strategy to put pressure on Iran, to push them to negotiate. The point is, I think they have not responded positively to this strategy. And, as an expert, I would say that they are not going to respond. So this strategy, in my view, does not work. So it's dangerous because when you increase the tension, at one stage, people can ask, okay, this strategy doesn't work. What do we do? So there is, I suppose, some temptations to, and we know that in the US administration, there are some people who think that a war with Iran could be a solution. So I think this strategy is inefficient. And in some ways, what we see today can be dangerous. But at one stage, the tensions are so much that any event could derail and if it could be problematic.
Shocking to imagine that anybody would feel a war could be a solution. Let's go to Tehran, to Mohammad Marandi from the University of Tehran. Mohammad, I hope you can hear us. Be interested to hear what you're saying about the situation in Tehran. What are people saying there? How do they feel about this situation?
Well, ordinary people don't seem to be very concerned at the moment because they believe that the United States military and intelligence services recognize that a war would be catastrophic for the United States because all the oil and gas installations in the Persian Gulf region, all the tankers, as well as in the Gulf of Oman, they would be destroyed in the crossfire, and they are all very vulnerable. And regimes like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, they would collapse almost immediately because they're completely dependent on oil and external factors rather than some sort of internal economy. Having said that, however, Iranians are deeply disturbed that the U.S. president can speak in genocidal terms, threaten a Holocaust. Of course, this is what Clinton once did as well when she spoke about obliterating Iran. And then in Western countries, this doesn't really make any waves. This is, he's threatening to destroy 80 to 90 million people. And in Western countries, that's business as usual, a bit worried about whether there's going to be conflict or not, or otherwise. But I think the mood here is also quite clear that the Iranians have tried to ease tensions, despite the fact that the United States violated the nuclear agreement, left the nuclear agreement over a year ago, and despite the fact that the Europeans have been in complete violation of the agreement under American pressure. The Iranians have continued to remain in the agreement for the last year, basically being the only side that is committed to the agreement in order to show the international community that it is the United States that is raising tensions. And of course, within that context, it is mostly people like Bolton, Pompeo, Netanyahu, Mohammed bin Salman, and Mohammed bin Zayed, the leaders of Saudi Arabia, or the effective leaders of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
That's the group that your foreign minister refers to as the B team. Can I ask you, Mohammed Marandi, about the rocket fired into Baghdad?
That's right.
What is being reported in Tehran about that? I mean, clearly Donald Trump feeling that was an Iranian attack towards U.S. interests in Baghdad.
Well, that is being ridiculed here because it's obvious. Iranian leaders have been saying for the last few days that Iran is not going to start a war, but that if the United States initiates a war, Iran will strike back very hard. So why would Iran fire a rocket towards somewhere near the U.S. embassy? In fact, the belief here is that it is most probably a false flag operation, and that there are third parties who have an interest in war, such as Saudi Arabia, such as the Israeli regime, such as the United Arab Emirates. These countries have all cooperated with al-Qaeda and ISIS over the past few years and decades. ISIS and al-Qaeda have been working alongside the Israeli border for years. They were based there and cooperating with the Israelis. They've been cooperating, of course, extensively with Saudi Arabia for a very long time. ISIS, before it was al-Qaeda, before splitting away. So these countries have links to extremist groups, and they have a vested interest in carrying out false flag operations. And then there could be elements within the U.S. government. Who knows? Maybe Bolton is pushing for something. No one really knows, but it is silly to think that the Iranians would fire a rocket somewhere in the vicinity of the U.S. embassy. And then the president of the United States immediately is able to pinpoint who is behind it. And the same is true with the suspicious attacks on the ships off the coast of the United Arab Emirates.
That was last week.
Those also were
tankers,
very interestingly carried out immediately after Bolton said that they have intelligence from the Israelis that the Iranians want to carry out attacks. So it was very convenient to have those attacks, slight attacks, not major attacks. None of the ships were sunk, almost immediately after Bolton said that.
Mohammed Marandi, I need to stop you there just to point out that you made a remark about Israel. We were going to have an Israeli guest. Apparently you weren't happy to debate with that guest. So we've put that guest on hold. You're here because we need an Iranian perspective. Thank you very much, sir. We'll get back to you very shortly. Let's go to Washington. Matthew Brodsky waiting us there. Mr. Brodsky, good evening to you. Clearly, from your standpoint, we're looking at you for the kind of Trump comment, although we know you don't represent Donald Trump. But in terms of what you just heard from Tehran, do you feel convinced by what you've been listening to?
Yeah, speaking only on behalf of myself, what we just heard was cartoonish nonsense. It'd be too long to spend an entire show just debunking every single thing he said, from these attacks being, of course, something other than Iran's own proxies, which we know that they have throughout the region, specifically Hezbollah and Nujaba, Katib Hezbollah, the Badr organization. These are the three main Iraqi forces that essentially report to Iran. So this is why Bolton, our national security advisor, was quite clear when he decided to issue his warning a week or so ago that the warning is about attacking America or our interests or allies, and it's about Iran or any of its proxies doing some form of attack. So if this guy wants to live from Tehran here on a different planet and pretend as though like Iran had nothing to do with any of this, that's just frankly laughable. I'm happy to respond to any specific question that you may have, but the fact is the threat assessment from the United States, from our allies, from Israel as well, is rising throughout the Middle East. We see that from wherever you look, whether it's from terror tunnels in Lebanon that go into northern Israel, from their proxy, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who fires rockets from Gaza. The entire area west of Iran is essentially one operational zone for its proxies. Intelligence has suggested, and I'm sure your Israeli guest would have said that if your Iranian guest were to, of course, approve of his participation, would say that the intelligence has shown that rockets, Zelzal missiles, Zulfikar missiles, those that have a 700-kilometer range have been moved into western Iraq. So from there, that puts Saudi Arabia in target. That puts, of course, Tel Aviv within range. These are all unacceptable threats, of course, from America's standpoint when it comes to our allies. And of course, Israel has a track record in the past of acting against these type of threats when it's in Syria, but I'm sure is aware that the operating space in Iraq is a little bit different. But they've been quite clear that they will, enforce their red lines, as they call it. But as to the rest of this, it's difficult to go back and forth with a commentary that is literally based on Looney Tunes.
Are you comfortable, Matthew Brodsky, and you've been very clear and categoric about what you think about what our Iranian guest was saying, are you comfortable with how Donald Trump expressed himself via Twitter? Some people might consider his expression inflammatory and badly placed.
You know, the funny thing is, as your other guest pretends to represent the Iranian people, when the Iranian people actually feel quite differently, he represents the regime. The people there know, just like most Americans know, that President Trump's tweet was in fact about replacing the Iranian regime under some type of threat, not about obliterating the entire country. And of course, we should, when your Iranian guest is trying to talk about these type of threats, I mean, you have conferences that they have devoted to wiping Israel off the map, to drawing these kind of cartoons, to Holocaust denial. So these are absurd points. As to whether the United States has had an issue as far as sending mixed messages, I think our media has a problem here in blowing some issues out of proportion. And I think they've done that when it came to some type of plan that was looked at for 120,000 troops. Our media understands and is smart enough on any other watch to recognize that, of course, the United States has contingency plans if they are going to be looking at some of their adversaries throughout the region. So this would make sense. It's normal. And under any other administration, it would be a non-story. But of course, we have a media environment that is slightly toxic, and these are the kind of stories you see spun.
Well, I hope you'll exclude our channel from that toxicity. We're trying to give a reasoned debate here and give everybody their say. So thank you, Matthew Brodsky, for that for the moment. We'll come back to you as soon as we possibly can. You, the viewers at home, you can react to what's been said here via the hashtag F24debate. We'll get your tweets put onto our video wall and get our guests to comment on them. Let's go to London, where Tara Kangalu is waiting for us, a journalist, fellow at the East-West Institute. Tara, of course, you covered the 2015 agreement. You know the ins and outs of this story immensely. What is your feeling right now, both as a journalist and an Iranian?
I think I'm going to speak as a journalist, objectively reporting in Iran and also in the United States, personal opinions are on the side. Objectively speaking, I think you have to look closely at who is behind all of this, who is really steering the pot and causing all this tension. And that person is John Bolton. John Bolton is someone who has a strong track record of causing tension and turmoil in the region, as everyone knows on this panel, and it's public information that he was one of the architects of the Iraq War. In fact, he was involved in fabricating facts about Iraq and Saddam having weapons of mass destruction, causing a lot of similar turmoil in the media that eventually led into the invasion in Iraq, and in a sense justifying it at the time, which eventually led to the discovery that there were no weapons of mass destruction, and all of that was to serve certain interests and drive certain agendas. So that is very clear. And another point is, this is more of a Saudi Arabia/Israel fight than it is the United States. And I believe that the Trump administration has to figure out whether or not they want to fight the war for Saudi Arabia and Israel, who are afraid of their position and standing in the region. Again, if you look at the Middle East, if you look at the region, everybody has their proxies, everybody has their interests, and everybody is using whatever power and means that they can have to push their own agendas. And the fight here is between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabia now, is really close to the United States, so they have them on their side. Then the third point here that your other guest mentioned, and that being the Iranian people, this is something that I've written about extensively, and I always say, knowing the nuances in Iran, a country of 80 million, where the majority of the population are, yes, against the regime, but the regime insiders who make a powerful minority very much benefit from these sanctions and the isolation that was created under President Ahmadinejad, and to an extent is created now. So the ones suffering from this pseudo war that is already going on with the stifling financial situation are the Iranians, everyday Iranians. So really, the war with Iran has, in a sense, already started, because those hurting from this are everyday Iranians, and the regime insiders are only emboldening in their position. And again, ultimately, one point I want to say is that, again, your guest from Washington addressed this, and that is regime change. Ultimately, again, this has been, on the record. The Trump administration, in this case, John Bolton and Secretary of State Pompeo, are very keen in leading this tension into what would be a potential regime change that they can orchestrate from inside Iran as a result of stifling economic sanctions and financial turmoil in the country.
Tara, thank you. We need to leave it there. Short break, and then it's part two of this debate on the situation between the US and Iran. Stay with us. Welcome back to part two of the France 24 debate. We're looking at the situation between the United States and Iran. Could the war of words between Washington and Tehran somehow spiral out of control? A tweet by Donald Trump said, "If Iran wants to fight, that will be the official end of Iran. Never threaten the United States again." This in response to a rocket aimed at the Green Zone in Baghdad. It landed 0.5 of a kilometer away from the US embassy. There are a number of issues why the US and Iran are estranged, to say the very least. The tension palpable, and some people concerned about what could happen next. Let's bring in our guests to talk more about the situation. Here in studio, Thierry Coville, who's research fellow at IRIS, the French Research Centre for International and Strategic Studies. Thierry is also author of Iran, the Invisible Revolution. Thierry, thanks for being with us. In Tehran, Mohammad Morandi, who is associate professor at the University of Tehran. Mohammad's comments very much not exactly representing the Iranian government, but clearly someone with an insight into what's happening in Tehran. And Mohammed, your presence very much appreciated here in this debate. Joining us in Washington, similarly speaking, not for the Trump administration, but with an insight into what goes on inside the Oval Office. Matthew Brodsky, senior fellow at the Security, Studies Group. Matthew, thank you for being with us. And in London, who just ended part one for us, Tara Kangalu, who's a journalist and fellow at the East West Institute. Tara, of course, speaking as an Iranian, but objectively as a journalist too. And Tara, we appreciate what you were just saying to us there in part one. Can I start back up with you again, Tara, about the situation as you see it? When you saw Trump's words, if Iran wants to fight, that will be the official end of Iran, never threaten the United States again. What did you think?
I think in a world where diplomacy can, in fact, be effective, as an American citizen, but also as a journalist and reporter, I don't understand the need for such hateful rhetorics. Again, in 2015, like it or not, there was an agreement, an international accord that was reached by world powers, by major world powers, that essentially managed to control a country the size of Iran to stop a nuclear program, a potential nuclear program. And then suddenly, the current president of the United States decided to unilaterally pull out of that agreement simply because of other issues, other matters that other countries in the region have a problem with, whether it's Iran missile program, its influence in the region, and potentially the power struggle that Iran poses in the region. As a result, he completely forgoed that international accord and is now sufficing to language of force, confrontation, and war, which again is not beneficial and as a matter of fact, is detrimental to Iran, but also the region. So I really don't see any use for that unless, like we have seen before, President Trump, unfortunately, is quite inconsistent with his messaging, as we saw with North Korea. In this case, he one day says he doesn't want war with Iran, but then the other day we see such hateful tweet. So we really have to see what comes next. But again, like I said earlier, this is not just the United States agenda towards Iran, but it's also one that's shared by Israel and Saudi Arabia. And that's what makes this different than the United States position towards North Korea.
Tara Kangalu in London there, thank you very much indeed. Just reinforcing what Tara was saying, we've had a tweet come through our first of the programme. You can, of course, send your opinions via hashtag F24 debate. This one's saying there appears to be a zero justification for any military conflict with Iran. Trump caused this crisis, in inverted commas, by pulling out of the nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Iran responded predictably by resuming its nuclear program. Then Hawks use this as a justification for war. Final comment there, madness with an exclamation mark. Of course, the production, Thierry, of uranium has been increased just this very day, hasn't it? Production of uranium in Iran.
Yes, I mean, I think that we have to be clear and not trying to give the impression that Iran is dangerous and is looking for a way to attack military interests.
But that's what people are saying.
It's
the
creating
American
these tensions. And what is clear in
the Israeli perspective,
the Mr. Professor from Tehran was right. The country which is respecting international law, actually, presently, is Iran and the countries which have stayed in nuclear agreement. The country which is not respecting international law is the US, which said that no reasons at all to get out of the agreement. I mean, the fact that Iran was respecting the agreement just tell the people there have been, I think, 13, 14 reports from the International Atomic Organization from the United States certifying, you have cameras in Iran, that Iran was respecting the deal. So, I mean, all these tensions, and this tweet was completely true, all these tensions we are seeing, I mean, is due to the fact that the US has gone out of the deal, as putting a huge pressure on Iran, and not only the regime, because the inflation has reached 50% according to the IMF. So the issue of, we are against the regime, but we love the Iranian population is completely false, because you have people, they cannot eat, meat presently in Iran. A lot of people, some people people are dying in the hospitals due to the lack of medicine. It's not maybe important for the US administration. There is lack of paper in Iran. So, newspapers are starting to say we are going to shorten the number of papers. So this maximum pressure and let's say, a rational answer from Iran, which is not irrational, was to stay after 1 year and saying presently to the European, just do something. We are respecting the deal. This deal has been certified by United Nations resolution, and we are getting, a disaster in terms of the economic. We are not receiving the economic benefits which were written in the deal, but on the opposite, the economic situation is a catastrophe. So I think basically the tensions are mostly due. Iran is rationally answering. Right? They have started to take some little steps to get out of the deal, and the question we can ask is, what do we do now? And I think the ball is in the camp of Europe, because obviously, and I think one of the troubles we see now is Europe was not able to answer to the economic pressure of the US. So I think Europe has to do something to counter US sanctions, and Europe maybe, we know it's difficult in geopolitical terms, to cooperate maybe more with China and Russia, how to save this deal, because all the basic stories. And also I disagree on the fact that, our allies, the gap between the European position and the US position in Iran could not be larger, because Europe wants to stay in the deal. Okay? So there might have disagreements, that's true, on Iranian regional policy, ballistic policy from Iran, but let's start, from a rational point of view. The best policy is, to maintain this deal, to make it credible, to make it work, okay, and then to talk about other things. But this strategy again, a lot of people in Europe don't understand the US strategy. This strategy of getting out of the deal, saying it's the worst deal ever, and asking Iranian people, government, to renegotiate a deal they have spent 2-3 years to negotiate, and to renegotiate 12 points. Honestly, in Europe, there is a lot of misunderstanding, to say at least, about this US strategy. So I think the viewers have to be clear. Iran has been respecting this deal. This deal is important for stability in the region. That's the point of view in Europe. So if Iran gets out of the deal, what do we do? And if Iran gets out of the deal, I think Mr. Macron said it, I think it will not be Iran's fault. Obviously, I think huge part of responsibility is on the US administration.
Indeed, Macron's been working hard to try to keep the 2015 deal afloat. Federica Mogherini of the EU tried to create this kind of alternative banking structure to get round the sanctions. That hasn't worked. In a moment, I'll come to Mohamed Marandi, but first, before that, Matthew Brodsky in Washington, I need to bring you back in to answer a couple of the points that Thierry was raising there. And I'll start by launching you by saying that perhaps Donald Trump, in pulling out the way he did and the way he promised he would, it was a campaign pledge, of course, so he kept his word on that one, at least. He's caused, in many ways, problems that Europe, for instance, finds very difficult to handle, to cope with.
Yes, and we'll certainly get into the Europe part. You're saying your previous guest, Tara, was speaking as a journalist, which is interesting because the things that she was saying are to essentially parrot exactly what Javad Zarif is saying, to say the exact same things that Trita Parsi, the head of the National Iranian American Council here in the U.S., says, which are exact regime talking points, which also means that right now on this show, you have two people essentially saying the exact same form of talking points, and you're telling me, Mark, that you wouldn't allow the Israeli guest on the show because you needed the Iranian viewpoint? I mean, that's frankly shameful. If you're going to have two Iranian guests spouting the exact same talking points, and you're in the news business, so you see that these are the exact talking points that happen all the time. So that's what is happening here. That's sad. As to Europe, yes, the whole goal of Iran's behavior right now is to go make Europe go after the United States. They want Europe to pressure the U.S. to be fearful so that the U.S. goes back into the nuclear deal. But of course, the nuclear deal doesn't work. Trying to tinker around the edges is like trying to patch the holes in a sinking ship. The more we learn about the past military dimensions of the nuclear program, the more we realize how much further along and how much more serious Iran was in terms of its weaponization program. The IAEA lacks sufficient capability to search the right sites, the right amount of sites, or the military sites even. So the deal doesn't work. The fact that European states currently want to try to fix something that in the end still is going to put Iran on a very nice glide path toward having a nuclear weapon simply doesn't make sense from this administration's point of view or from the point of view of anyone who was running as a Republican in the previous presidential election. You would have had the exact same outcome. So the saber rattling from Iran is to try to get Europe to blink. But let's be quite clear here. We know what is happening in the region. We see what's happening every day when it comes to Iran's proxies. Their moving of missiles. They want to pretend that this is part of a reaction to the United States getting out of the nuclear deal. Please, they've been helping Assad kill some 500,000 inside of Syria. This is something that has happened since 2011. This predates that. This was even during the negotiations under the Obama administration that they were carrying out this activity. That's why Secretary Pompeo's 12 points takes into account that it must encompass Iran's behavior. There must be a change to Iran's behavior. Otherwise, what's the entire point of this? But again, if you're going to have a nuclear deal that doesn't actually prevent Iran from having a nuclear program on one hand, and then on the other, you're going to allow Iran to continue shipping missiles to its different proxies to put the rest of America's allies under threat, clearly there's going to be a response to that. And to have this presented the way it is currently, obviously on a debate program, is just the inverse of reality.
We're giving you your time to express yourself, Matthew Brodsky. You haven't been interrupted in any way, shape or form, and we've given you a free rein to say what you want. So I don't think I can be any fairer with you than I already have been. And you'll continue to talk here for us, I hope. Matthew Brodsky of the Security Studies Group. Thank you for the moment. Let's bring in another tweet. Iran has consistently demonstrated a total lack of respect for international norms and has systematically violated its commitments in international treaties and agreements. That from a viewer. Thank you for that reaction. We're bringing now Mohammed Morandi in Tehran to comment on that and some of the words of Matthew Brodsky. Over to you, Mr. Morandi.
Well, a couple of things. First, I'd like to clarify that I offered to withdraw from the program because I do not want to debate with someone who I believe works within an apartheid system. I did not force anything upon anyone. And I find it very interesting that your American guest does not accept your guest in London, who I don't know, as an American. From what I just heard, she is an American citizen. So she is not American because her position doesn't reflect his. And I think that is probably because she has Middle Eastern roots or West Asian roots. But again, I didn't interrupt you. Again, you insist on imposing your narrative. So that I think is reflective of Make America Great Again. It's very whitish. Anyway, going back to what we were supposed to talk about, and that is that, first of all, in Iran, everyone in Iran has been opposed to the sanctions. And that is why the Iranians accepted the nuclear deal. The debate in Iran was over whether the terms were fair or not. Some thought Iran gave too many concessions, thought it was a good deal, but at the end of the day, everyone agreed to it. So the Iranian side, even those who thought Iran gave too many concessions, were abiding by the deal. The government, the parliament, the Supreme National Security Council, all the elements of the state were on board. So it is the United States that withdrew, and it is the Iranians through consensus who remained. So who is the side that's violating international law? And again, I'd like to stress that according to regular polls carried out by the University of Maryland, the political order in Iran has a high level of legitimacy. Iranian presidential elections are harshly fought. We have consistently over 70% turnout. Ahmadinejad wins, Rouhani wins, but in any case, there was a consensus for Iran, and continues to be a consensus in Iran, to remain within the deal, even though the Europeans are in complete violation, despite pretty words and nice statements. Having said that, again, what I find very disturbing, and contrary to what your American guest was saying, Trump's tweet was Iran. It had nothing to do with the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Republic of Iran, the part of the nation of Iran. It was Iran, mentioned twice. In other words, this was a genocidal tweet. But in the West, it's fine. And of course, it follows a pattern, because in Western countries, you give weapons to Saudi Arabia to starve the people of Yemen. You wipe out Libya. You destroy the lives of people in Venezuela. It's all fine because it's for the greater good of civilization. You support ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, as we saw in the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012,
you guys just
the
let him
WikiLeaks
say this
documents, and a
stuff?
host of other
Really?
leaked material.
Go ahead,
you
Matthew,
spoke for
reply.
a long time, and I was completely quiet. So if you would show your capability to listen, show your capability to tolerate
I've listened
others.
to this. It's just,
Your
I mean, you're
intolerance is
speaking
the problem.
nonsense,
And that's
cartoonish
the
garbage,
problem
and
of,
the whole world
that's
is
the
frankly
problem
aware
of your
it.
regime. That's the problem of your regime.
Yes, we heard it
because
last time
you
when
think
you
that
issued
the world
the threats
is
precisely
yours,
as your regime
that you
carried them out.
dictate terms. You do not allow others to talk. You do not allow others to
This
talk
guy's
because
talking
you
about
don't
a
have an
tweet
argument.
from the president.
You get frustrated.
They
So listen.
wish to
So
wipe
listen.
Israel off the
The
map,
United
right?
States,
so this is something that
the
they
United
literally have
States
hosted
relationship
conferences on.
with
For
Iran
years they've done
is
that.
based.
Was
The
there
United
some part
States,
of the country
the
we
United
missed that he was
States
talking
allies
about
in the
the
region
Professor
are
Morandi
Saudi
and
Arabia.
Matthew Brodsky, can I pause you both
the
because we're
United
struggling to hear
States,
either of you speaking?
He's not
Matthew,
going to
I'll bring
let
you
me
in a
talk.
second. Let Professor Morandi finish, please. Professor Morandi, over to you. Please finish what you're saying. Then Mr. Brodsky will reply.
Thank you. U.S. allies in the region are Saudi Arabia, which we saw what they did to the Prime Minister of Lebanon. They kidnapped and beat him, which is engaging in a genocidal war in Yemen, which has created a siege on Qatar, which has supported the coup in Turkey, and which cut to pieces a Saudi reporter in Istanbul in their own consulate. Their second ally is the United Arab Emirates, another dictatorship. And of course, Israel, which, since you don't have a guest, I don't want to comment on that. Who are the Iranian allies? Your guest in the United States says terrorists. Hezbollah as they have elected parliamentarians. They are part of the government in Lebanon. They are a part of the majority coalition in Lebanon.
It is a group that is
in
classified,
Iraq,
though,
the
as
allies
terrorist,
that your
isn't it,
guest
by
speaks about are elected in the
international
Iraqi
community.
parliament. They are elected MPs in Iraq. The Iraqi prime minister, who is elected by parliament, the Iraqi president, and the head of the prime minister, the president, and the head of parliament are all elected or indirectly elected officials, and they're close to Iran. So Iran's friends and allies in the region are these countries, and U.S. allies are those regions.
Professor Morandi, let me pause
The
you. Let me
U.S.
bring you the
ally
tweet,
Saudi
then let me
Arabia
bring
is the
in Mr.
same
Brodsky
country that
again.
15 of the
Sorry,
90
Professor, I need
terrorists
to pause you
came
there.
from
Thank you
Saudi
very much
Arabia
indeed.
on 9/11.
Latest tweet
Sure.
we're seeing, Iran is showing the world what diplomacy and integrity is, whilst facing continued provocative actions by the war hawks in Trump's administration. Matthew Brodsky, go ahead.
Look, I mean, I'm not going to adopt his frame and just respond to the fact that the U.S.
I'm giving you a
is
chance to speak, sir.
invading
Go
other
ahead.
planets. And come on, this is nuts. Yeah, clearly Iran has a policy which is to take over more of the Middle East and to do so with its proxies. That's why ever since Aleppo fell in Syria, at the end of 2016, as I recall, that war has pretty much been over. But since then, Iran still ships in offensive weapons, surface-to-surface missiles into Syria. This is all part of their plan to, of course, expand and to attack America's allies, which, yes, are Saudi Arabia and are Israel, and, of course, include the Emirates and most of the Middle Eastern states, in fact. who are also opposed to what Iran is doing. I actually don't think the France 24 viewing audience is naive enough to believe most of the things that he was trying to say that the U.S. is responsible for.
Try to give a balanced view,
I don't even want to get
everybody
into
their say.
addressing that part.
Mr. Brodsky, thank you.
I know, but Iran was responsible for carrying out a terrorist attack, or trying to carry out a terrorist attack just last year inside of France. And of course, you had outside help from a different intelligence agency in stopping that attack. And that should make some Europeans say, geez, I wonder why Iran is behaving that way. Perhaps they're not actually an ally.
Matthew Brodsky, thank you very much indeed. Final word, Thierry.
Yes, I think here I want to tell our American guests that, in Europe, they would not say, they're not completely naive. But I think the issue is to take Iran seriously. So Iran is a regional power. I don't think it's completely also stupid to say they want to invade the region. I mean, come on, if they intervene in 2014 in Iraq, they were the only country to fight the Islamic State. So I don't think the Islamic State is a good friend of the US. They have been fighting in Islamic State, Al Qaeda in Syria too. So I mean, to have this narrative, Iran wants to destabilize the region, I think is not constructive enough. And in Europe, they have disagreements with Iran, but they are not adopting this narrative. The basic fact, and the viewers should understand that, I repeat it, the country which is respecting international law, you like it or you don't like it, you cannot attack Iran for things they did 20 years ago. They have been respecting this deal. So it was not a perfect deal, but it has been respected. And the country which is not respecting it and creating a lot of tension is the US. I mean, these are facts. I'm sorry.
Guests, stay with us. Media Watch is coming up right now. With Media Watch, Emma James. Emma, good evening to you. Who would have imagined that social media would have become the place where world leaders could make threats against another country?
Yes, it does seem incredible, and I'm sure that nobody ever had it in mind when they came up with these ideas for social media, but certainly Donald Trump does on occasion use it to that effect. As we saw earlier, if Iran wants to fight, that will be the official end of Iran. Never threaten the United States again. 207,000 people have liked that tweet. More than 60,000 have retweeted it. One of the most interesting reactions, of course, comes from Iran itself. The Iranian Foreign Minister, Javad Zarif, and he seems to have taken a leaf out of the Trump playbook, really, by giving an insulting nickname to the B team, as he refers to them. He appears to be referring to Trump's foreign policy advisors with that. Goaded by the B team, he hopes to achieve what Alexander Genghis and other aggressors failed to do. Economic terrorism and genocidal taunts won't end Iran, he says. Never threaten an Iranian. Try respect, it works. Now, looking at other reactions to that tweet from Donald Trump, even some people who are big fans of the US president have said things like this: I love our president, but this is scary to me. There is a ringing endorsement from Lou Dobbs, a Fox News presenter, fairly unsurprisingly. God bless President Trump. Iran's so-called leaders must think they're dealing with Bush or Obama. Interestingly, it does appear that he may have been influenced in writing that tweet by a piece that was on Fox News just 9 minutes before. You see there, 4:16, Fox talked about US and Iran tensions, and 9 minutes later, Donald Trump fired off that tweet. Interestingly, though, one thing a lot of people are sharing today on social media, and there are plenty of the tweets like this, old tweets of the US president, this one dating back to 2011. Barack Obama will attack Iran in the not too distant future because it will help him win the election. Lots of tweets like that from 2011 and 2013 criticising his predecessor for what he saw as being likely to capitalise on a supposed conflict and actually creating the conflict in order to do so. Of course, many people saying Donald Trump is doing exactly that with this particular round of saber rattling. Taking a look at the Washington Post, this piece by Ishan Tharoor says that Trump places the Middle East on a knife edge, and it's likened really to a staring contest, he says. What's interesting, though, is he says that Iran may well shrug off this saber rattling because we've seen these kind of very strong words used against North Korea, which then weren't backed up by actions. And what this right is wondering is whether the US president might actually be weakening his own position by being so strong on Twitter, but not actually strong in reality.
Indeed, food for thought. Emma James with MediaWatch, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to all our guests debating this situation between the US and Iran. Stay with us, more to come here, live from Paris.